Is the sports wagering investigation finally coming to a conclusion? It looks that way. We'll break it down. Iowa wrestling definitely looks like they're going to be hit hard and still awaiting a name on the football front today. Locked On Hawkeyes.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Available wherever you get podcasts. You can always find us also over on YouTube. While you're there, hit that subscribe button. It helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege or enter promo code LockedOnCollege for a free white tech hat with any purchase. You won't want to take off your Bird Dogs, we promise you. Well, glad to have you aboard with us here today as we talk a little Iowa football, some Iowa wrestling, even some basketball news on both the men's and the women's front. We got a busy one here for you today and a lot to break down. So on Tuesday, a press release was sent out by the University of Iowa indicating that 11 student athletes have heard back from the NCAA and their eligibility in the sports gambling investigation. This has been a story that has really dominated the summer here in the state of Iowa, with both Iowa and Iowa State obviously being included. Over 40 student athletes combined between the two institutions. We found out a number of names. We found out a number of different sports that have been involved, and we were still waiting for the final shoe to drop. And one thing that I've told you out there from the beginning is one thing that I heard from the get-go is that wrestling was going to be hit incredibly hard. And that certainly appears to be the case. We got some information and we'll get to that in just a moment. But what it starts with here, and I know what the most people are here for, is the content on the football side. And that's where we're going to begin this conversation. As we said from the get-go, this was going to be something that was going to be impactful, but not overly impactful. Iowa State, we knew on the surface, was going to be in a much more precarious spot than the Iowa Hawkeye football program, and that has played out. And it appears we're still waiting now for one more name to come out on the football front. I have, again, told you the rumors that I'm hearing. Defensive backfield is continued the speculation that is out there, but nothing definitive on that front. But it does look like there will be one more name that comes out. One interesting note, though, from this press release from the University of Iowa. The institution has received the SAR determinations. That's the ruling from the NCAA for the 11 individuals who are current student athletes. Because this information is protected through the Family Education Right and Privacy Act, FERPA, specific information will only be released once we have received the student's consent. Now, I say this because it strikes me as odd, because from what I know of FERPA, this isn't FERPA. FERPA is about your transcripts, your grades, actual things to do with your schoolwork. Not about being investigated by the NCAA about gambling. It feels like trying to hide behind something that isn't exactly there and not just coming out and naming the names. So be it. It's what it is. Struck me as odd. If you're a lawyer, if you know the law better than I do, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, help me out. From what I know of it, what I read about it last night, didn't strike me as something that would fall under that jurisdiction, but that is what we have at this point in time. We await the fate of what's going to happen there. We're going to talk about it a little bit more on the wrestling front here, but do want to talk about some good things on the football field. And this is also the time of year where we get watch lists. And watch lists they're something, right? They're off-season content. Maybe you get a story out of it if you're a writer. Maybe you get something and it's a jumping off point to talk about. But I just saw the full list of everybody that's showed up on one of these watch lists. Now, it doesn't take a lot to put together a watch list, right? You go back and you look at stats from a year ago and boom, away you go, right? But I found this interesting. So we have here listed a bunch of different guys, including an award that until this offseason, I'd never heard of in college football. It's the Comeback Player of the Year. That's right. The Comeback Player of the Year award is awarded in college football. Who knew? Not me. At least I don't remember knowing about this one. And we got a few different Hawkeyes that are listed there. Of course, Cade McNamara coming off the knee injury. He is listed on this award watch list. Erick All also coming in off of his injury at Michigan, the back injury, and making his way to Iowa City. And then Jermari Harris, which is great to see him on this list, and a guy that is going to be incredibly impactful for this Iowa football team this year. We know Cooper DeJean, with not just the pedigree and what we saw from him as a playmaker a year ago. We saw this a couple of years back with Riley Moss after he had that incredible junior season, and teams just stopped throwing his way. They didn't go his direction. You very well could see something very similar happening with Cooper DeJean this year, where we know he's a lockdown corner. We know he's excellent, and we know he's still learning the position. Remember, he never played cornerback until late in his freshman year. He was a safety at the high school level. He was a guy that was out there making plays in the middle of the field, not out on the edge. And then they just put him over there, and because he's Cooper DeJean and the dude's a unicorn, he just goes out there and plays at an incredibly high level, becomes an All-American as a sophomore, now getting ready for his junior year. Harris is an important part there, and good to see him show up on this list. A couple other guys that are on lists. Well, speaking of Cooper DeJean, he is on the Bronco Nagurski Trophy watch list. That is Defensive Player of the Year in college football, along with the Chuck Bednarik Award, Jim Thorpe for Defensive Back of the Year, and the Paul Hornung Award for versatility. A couple other guys on these watch lists. We got Nick Jackson. He's on the Buckus Award watch list for linebackers, and the Lombardi for defensive lineman. That one's odd because he's not a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman, but he's on the watch list. These watch lists, again, sometimes leave you scratching your head. Kaleb Johnson. You've been listening here for a while. Every dayers know I believe that this offensive line is even okay. Kaleb Johnson, he can have a monster season coming up this year for this Iowa football team. Logan Jones on the Remington Trophy watch list. If Logan Jones even stays on that watch list, if you will, if he's one of the top, say, 25 centers in college football this year, look out. Now we're talking. Now we're building. Now we're feeling good. Luke Lachey, he's on the Mackey Award list along with Erick All. You got McNamara, as mentioned. He's on the Comeback Player of the Year award watch list along with the Johnny Unitas Golden Arm Award and the Maxwell Award. Drew Stevens for the Luke Groza and Tory Taylor for the Ray Guy Award. So that's what we have just on these watch lists already. And a lot of people make watch lists. This is not to overstate what it is, but already names are out there. Expectations are high, and they should be. Get Cade healthy. Get him back in practice. I continue to tell you what I told you last week. It's touch and go. Will he go against Utah State? He is going to try, but it's no sure thing. Good thing coming up later here today on Wednesday. We will hear from Kirk Ferentz. Perhaps an update on that injury situation and where he is. Are we going to get anything definitive? No. There's nothing definitive this time. That's where we are. Hopeful that he'll be ready to go for Utah State. As I told you last week, still the same today. Even if he's back, you'd hope he'd be able to maybe start to go through practice by Friday of this week, early next week. Game plan, game week. Got to get him ready. Got to be out there practicing a little bit. What does practicing mean? Does it mean full go? Does it mean that he is just doing a couple of walkthrough drills? Again, that is all to be determined. We continue here on Locked On Hawkeyes. Iowa wrestling perhaps hit the hardest of anybody with this gambling investigation. It was going to be a different season this year with the departures, including Spencer Lee exhausting his eligibility. A little bit of a rebuilding year for Iowa wrestling. Now, with some of the names that are out there, it's going to get hairy. We'll tell you about those names that are out there, the potential of what an Iowa lineup's going to look like on the wrestling mat next year, plus some basketball news, including Iowa getting a top 20 player in the country. We'll get into that as we roll through here. This is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Well, guys, ladies, time to talk about bird dogs. Bird dogs, they make you look good with great shorts that are your khaki shorts, but they're designed for a slimmer fit, look great through the leg, and it gives you a sculpted look. They do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they just fit a whole lot better. I got pairs of both, and I will tell you, it is not even close for me. Bird dogs are the way that I go, and if they're both clean, I know I'm going to my bird dogs every single time. No more of that stiff, restricting cotton. They move with you. You can have them at the gym, on the golf course, just walking around town, even going out for a night. They look that good. They're absolutely what you want. And as anybody right now knows, certainly in the state of Iowa and basically everywhere right now in the country, it's hot. Bird Dogs uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric. It's going to keep you cool in all the places you want to be cool and dry all day long. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or just enter the promo code when you go to birddogs.com. It's lockedoncollege and you're going to get a free white tech hat with your order. Again, that's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or that promo code lockedoncollege for a free white tech hat. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. Trent Condon back with you once again here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Well, we got more football content coming your way. In fact, if you're looking for more right now, the time is now. Our two-part ultimate college football preview is live on Locked On Hawkeyes. You can look back on our feed from just the other day. I was on there with a bunch of guys from our Locked On network on the Big Ten. We were previewing the season. We were talking about some of the expectations. And I think, again, as I've told you guys throughout the last couple of months, I just don't understand the love for Wisconsin in comparison to Iowa. Is their schedule a little bit easier than Iowa's? You can make that argument. Of course, they get that game in Madison. I just don't believe that the gap is that big. So we threw a little shade the Badgers' way, had a little fun over there, breaking down the Big Ten college football preview. You can find it here on this feed. You can find it on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get into some wrestling and some names that are out there currently right now and the guys that potentially are going to be out this season for Iowa. That is impactful. That is scary when you see this list in a year that rebuilding maybe is not the right term for it, but it was going to be a different year for Iowa wrestling this year. Penn State's a behemoth, the defending national champion, and they're going to be the runaway favorite once again this year, not just to win the Big Ten championship, but obviously, as we know with Big Ten wrestling, to win yet another national championship with Cael Sanderson. This comes from the wrestling room and Pat Mineo. Now, I know that there are plenty in the wrestling community and certainly plenty of Hawkeye fans that have their own opinions about him. He has information, not always right, sometimes right, though, and we're going to go with it here. This is what he said today on X. Iowa gambling suspensions released. Tony Cassioppi, the heavyweight, Nelson Brands, Abe Assad, and Kobe Siebrecht, all suspended for full season. Also mentioned that Shriver and Kennedy have received partial suspensions and will miss a few matches. This is what we're talking about, the potential of 30% of the season. If you gamble over $800, that's what you're talking about, and looking for reinstatement. So I believe the last two guys probably fall under the reinstatement category that you're looking at. Perhaps, though, all six of these guys would be part of the 11 that are mentioned. If that's the case, we know that Noah Shannon is involved in it, Aaron Blom, though his career betting on Iowa, you would feel is probably going to be over. Jack Johnson, a walk-on wide receiver, and then maybe one more on the football front, and then waiting for potentially one more name of current student athletes of the 11 listed here. As mentioned, Iowa wrestling, rebuilding is not the right word, right? It just, putting together a team right now to beat Penn State is difficult, but you go through this lineup and what it would look like when you take away those four players that Mineo had mentioned. Those four wrestlers, they're off the mat for Iowa this year. If that plays out and this actually comes to fruition, this is what you're looking at. Drake Ayala at 26, potential All-American. Brody Teske at 33, maybe a potential All-American. Real Woods, all right, good shape. Vinovich comes in from Oklahoma State. He'll be wrestling at 49. At 57, you get the North Dakota State All-American from a year ago in Franek. And you continue down the path. You get the other North Dakota State, perhaps, wrestler at 65. Does Kennedy go up to 74? What about Gabe Arnold in his true freshman campaign? Do you wrestle him now, or do you redshirt him knowing that you're not winning the crown this year? Is that a direction that they go? And then you get into those upper weights. And at 84 and 97 and heavyweight, it is a whole lot of question marks. Look, those guys, the four that are mentioned, those are wrestlers that you anticipated this year were going to be a huge part. If I was going to have any kind of push, if Cassioppi was finally going to get over the hump, if we're going to see the ascension that we saw from Nelson Brands and take another step this season, if Abe Assad was going to put it all together and maybe look like the guy that we saw as a freshman, you could get excited. You could put it together, add another piece here, add another piece there, maybe a Ferrari, and you're looking pretty good. Now, that's off the table. It just is. It's off the table. And this team is going to be taking some lumps. This team is not going to be a team that, with the right breaks and a couple of things go their way, maybe there's a path. No, there's no path. There's no path if this plays out. And we told you that Iowa wrestling was going to be the most impacted of the teams. We've been telling you that since back in June when some of the names were starting to trickle out and we were hearing more and more. And that's something on both the Iowa and Iowa State perspective that I continue to relay to everybody out there, that that's something that's going to play out. This was even more impactful than that. This was an eye-opener and definitely a hard hit coming up for Iowa wrestling. Wrapping things up, we go to another winter sport. That is basketball. We got news on both the men's and the women's front, including Iowa picking up a top 20 player. That's right, a top 20 player making their commitment to the Hawkeyes. That's as we come back here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Trent Condon back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. So mention a couple of stories that are out there right now on the basketball front. And the first one, a top 20 player committing to Iowa. Jermari Houston from over in Davenport. Might remember, I believe her older sister was one of the top national players and went out of the state in college. Number 1 player in Iowa and the number 19 player in the country from ESPN. Class of 2025, Jermari Houston has made her commitment to the Iowa women's program. A big get for Lisa Bluter, staying home, if you will, for Houston, being over there in the Quad Cities and being able to make the short drive over to Iowa City. When you look towards the future, you have to take this momentum. You know, when we talk about this women's basketball team and the frustration that was out there this summer when Iowa could not land one of the players they were looking at in the portal. Now, Lisa Bluter said there weren't a whole lot out there that could actually help us out, right? There just weren't a whole lot of players that they felt were going to be able to come in and impact them. Yes, there were a couple of names that were out there. There were a couple of names that made a whole lot of sense. You had the 2 centers that were at the forefront. Morrow from DePaul was another one. That would make sense, and you would hope that those would be the kind of players that were going to come in and help this program out. But you didn't break through, right? You didn't get them. You didn't have the NIL money. You didn't have a way to sell playing with Caitlin Clark. Look, there's only a certain amount of shots that can go around. And as great as Caitlin Clark is, and as good as she makes her teammates leading the country in points and assists, there are certain players that just don't want to play with a player like that. Okay, all well and good. But what Iowa has to do, and what this program needs to do, is build on this momentum. There's never going to be another Caitlin Clark. Not as a basketball player, but just as she's different. She is different of what she means. The way that she has changed the sport. This is a generational talent. But if you're going to become a year in, year out contending team, where you feel like you're going to have an opportunity every single year to be in that upper echelon of women's college basketball. We know it's not a real big one. And though it has got more depth to it, the women's game, than it did in the past when it was, well, for years, Tennessee. I guess you can go before that, Louisiana Tech, and then Tennessee took over. Yeah, some good Texas teams. And then suddenly, of course, what UConn and Gino Auriemma built themselves into. There's more depth now. Baylor, Notre Dame, LSU, on and on and on. There's more programs now that have an opportunity. And if you want to get up into that blue blood status, you got to build on this. And you got to hit it hard. And you got to get the recruits to keep this momentum going. This is a great step. Congratulations to Coach Bluter, Coach Jensen and company for getting this one done. This is a big one. Jermari Houston becoming a Hawkeye. Another one on the basketball front. Over on the men's side, this is a crazy story. This is an absolutely wild story from Iowa basketball because it felt like we knew what the roster was going to look like. And one of the changes that we had was Amarion Nimmers, a walk-on from the Quad Cities, was departing. Went in the transfer portal late. It was during the summertime. He'd been working out with the team and decided he was going to go into the portal. Now, Likely, he didn't find a home that was to his liking. Most programs are probably full on scholarships. He's a walk-on. I'm sure he was looking for a scholarship. Completely understand that. I probably didn't find it. So he comes back. And now this is 2 years in a row that we've seen this happen. Agundale, 2 seasons ago, went into the portal. Didn't find a home. Came back. Unfortunately, did not build on those few moments that we got the year previous. I was basically the same guy this year. Nimmers, I know, is exciting. You see the highlight video, and I'm sure a lot of people did. And he put together a highlight video that he put up in the transfer portal, and people got all pumped up. Well, it's a highlight video. He's not going to put on his highlight video a bunch of him missing layups and chucking up threes that are hitting the side rim. That's not what you put in a highlight video, right? Come on. I understand the excitement that is there. I was set. They think they have their point guard of the future in Brock Harding. They believe that there's going to be a step forward this year coming up from Desante Bowen. And maybe a starting backcourt that has Tony Perkins in the point and Josh Dix playing together. And 2 combo guards, and you kind of figure it out from there with both those guys that can handle the ball, play off the ball, and do some different things. Perkins and his ability to get to the rim, Dix and his ability to shoot the basketball, and that's what you're going to hope for this season. We'll see if Nimmers is ever a guy that can put it together and be a Big Ten player. It's incredibly rare for a walk-on, though, in basketball to hit big. Look, we've been lucky. We've seen some walk-ons that have done it. Daryl Moore, going back in the day, that was a walk-on that was able to get it done, right? But that is a rarity in basketball. Great when he can have it. Great when it's going to happen. Just a weird, interesting story. Nimmers is back, though, with the Hawkeyes this year. And we'll see. Maybe we'll see him out there a little bit this upcoming season. That'll do it for today here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks, as always, for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every single day. We got more coming up this week. Going to look to track down LaShawn Daniels and talk some Iowa football with him, the former Hawkeye running back. And next week, my buddy Jace is going to be back. Hopefully, we'll see if we can talk him into it. He's a lawyer. Maybe he can help me out here with this FERPA thing and see exactly if I got this thing wrong and what the University of Iowa is hiding behind a law that, as I read through it, that's not what it is, but that's a conversation for next week. We'll be back with you again tomorrow. Your team every day. That's what we do here on the Locked On Network. No matter what your team is, we have you covered. Locked On Big Ten. Lots of great content going on right there. We have you covered on that front. Fantasy football, gambling, you name it, we have it. And every team, MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, we have it all here on the Locked On Network. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Go Hawks.